Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But if you're ready to level up your life and get results that truly matter in your health, business, mindset, and relationships, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to Sheer Madness, where we have unscripted, real conversations with the world's top athletes, entrepreneurs, and coaches. Discover real-world and tactical advice from the best in the business. Let's go.
All right, Ben Azadi, thank you so much for coming on Sheer Madness today. Welcome to the show.
Grateful to be here, Rachel. I had a blast with you on my show last week, and I'm excited to do round two with you.
Yes, we talked all things gut health last week and mindset, and today we're going to talk about all things keto and your transformation journey here today. And I know after diving into all of your stuff, it looks like you've had a pretty incredible weight loss transformation yourself using keto. So I want to start out today's podcast kind of looking back a little bit about where you were at before that transformation, physically and mentally. I work with a lot of my own clients who, sometimes we have to hit this place of rock bottom. And I think it is, yes, physical, but it is also mental as well, too. So tell me a little bit about that transformation. Where were you at before, mentally, physically, before you got into everything that you are in now?
Yeah, it's a great question because for the first 24 years of my life, Rachel, I was just tiptoeing my way through life, hoping to land safely on death's door. Didn't really have any goals, followed a standard American diet, AKA stupid American diet. Processed foods, sad diet. My mom and my dad actually immigrated to America from Iran in the 1970s. I was born in 1984 here in Miami Beach, Florida. And I was left to my own devices growing up, parents divorced. My mom worked at two separate Kentucky Fried Chickens. So she would bring me home every night leftovers, and I would eat fried chicken just about every single night. And it showed with my physical health, my mental health. I hung out with the wrong crowd, had addictions to video games and drugs and a bad environment. I was a really bad student in school. And this transferred into my adulthood, where I found myself back in 2008 being a 24-year-old man who was obese, 250 pounds, physically obese, but also mentally obese, mentally bankrupt. At that time, I was going through a really bad breakup with my ex-girlfriend. And I was rock bottom, to the word that you used earlier. I hit rock bottom. I was devastated. I was depressed. I never did any kind of self-development work, didn't know how to handle it. And I was crying every single day. I was so depressed and hurt that I felt like taking my life. I would look on the internet several times to find ways to commit suicide. And every time I would think about that, I would think about my mother and what I would leave behind for her and the devastation she would have to deal with. So it stopped me from pursuing suicide, but it was a vicious cycle for months, exploring suicide, stopping myself, exploring, stopping. And I knew I had to figure things out. I didn't have the energy levels I wanted. I didn't have any goals, any ambition, didn't understand health and nutrition at all. And I was handed a book. My best friend handed me a book. And that one book led to two books, led to 5 books, led to 10, and et cetera. And I became obsessed with learning from incredible people like Bob Proctor and Earl Nightingale and Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins, incredible leaders in our space, in the space of self-development. And what the books did for me, more than anything else, the books helped me actually take ownership and responsibility for the first time in my life. And that word responsibility is important for every single human being. That is your ability to respond to life. My ability to respond to life up until that point was poor. I was blaming my genetics. I was blaming my enabling family members, my slow metabolism. I was the victim of my history. But I said, no longer will I be that victim of the history of my history. I'm going to be the victor of my destiny. And I started to actually take ownership. I started to exercise. I started to eat better. I started to read Men's Health magazine, which I know you were on the cover of. And I just started to change my ways. And fast forward 9 months from making that decision, because it really is just a decision to be made. I went from 250 pounds down to 170 pounds, 34% body fat to 6% body fat, size 38 waist down to size 30 waist. So finally, Rachel, I carved out a physical six-pack, which is great. You have a great physical six-pack. But the most important thing, and we talked about this on my show, was a mental six-pack. I started to think better thoughts. I started to understand how important those thoughts are that we have every single day. And I started to change my thoughts. And that's what got me into the health space. I became a personal trainer, opened up a CrossFit gym, sold a CrossFit gym, and then became certified as a functional health coach and started educating the world.
Yeah, what an incredible story. And I just want to first say thank you for sharing that part about depression and suicide. I know there's probably people listening who have even been there before, and it's no joke when you are depressed, and you're physically unhealthy, you're in an environment that's unhealthy, you don't feel like you have anything going for you. Those thoughts come to mind, and I can only imagine, what that felt like to be in that place, but also to, know that there had to be something more for you. So I know there's a lot of people listening who will definitely resonate with that story, who are hearing that today. But it sounds like one of the first things you did was kind of turn towards personal development and books and reading. And I think sometimes, we're searching for something. Sometimes people turn towards, okay, I need to lose weight. And maybe it's the physical transformation for some people. It's maybe the mental transformation. They definitely go hand in hand. I am huge with my practice about like the information that we're putting into our mind, because based off of our childhood, based off of the way we are raised, we develop these different thought patterns that are oftentimes a scarcity type mindset. We have a lot of negative self-talk. And I actually just did like an Instagram video yesterday about this, of just like the power of our thoughts. And oftentimes we find ourselves affirming a lot of these negative things. I'm depressed, I'm overweight, I'm fat, I'm never going to do anything with my life. And then guess what happens? We don't, because we're literally saying these affirmations, which create these different feeling of depression, unhappy, lack of motivation, which ends up with a result of getting more of that. And I know that's a lot of what even like, what's his first name? Proctor, that guy
Bob Proctor. Yeah.
Bob Proctor talks about that, which is definitely like the law of attraction.
Yeah.
So you started reading and diving into the personal development world. What were some of like the big things that helped you start that transformation journey?
It's a great question. I love that you asked that question, because I agree. It's not just physical, it's mental. You have to exercise before you can exercise. The average person is thinking about 60,000 thoughts per day. A lot of thoughts. And it's estimated that about 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts from the day before. To your point, they're learned behaviors. Typically the first 7 years of our life, we develop these paradigms. So we have to stop that pattern. So for me, I had to recognize when I had a negative thought, a stinking thought, and change that to a better thought. I always say, if your thinking is stinking, your dreams are shrinking. And that's health dreams, relationship dreams, financial dreams, all your dreams are shrinking. So I got really good, and I'm still working on it to this day, from identifying a negative thought and then changing that to a positive thought. And it's very, very sneaky. It happens throughout the entire day. When you're walking your dog, you're washing dishes, you're brushing your teeth. Like, what are you thinking? And whatever you think about most of the time is what you're going to get. That's a universal law. Whatever you feed energy to expands. And if you want the science behind that, there's the reticular activation system in the brain, RAS. And whatever you feed that, you're going to see more of that. So if you keep feeding yourself, I'm overweight, I'm depressed, I'm XYZ, that's negative, you're just going to keep seeing that and keep getting the same results. So for me, I had to identify when I had those bad thoughts, and I look at them like Dr. Wayne Dyer explained this very beautifully. I looked at those thoughts as a cloud that has all this like lightning and thunder, and I just let that cloud pass. And then I choose a beautiful cloud with rainbows behind it. And that's how we choose better thoughts. And to take this a step further real quick, the science behind the RAS, a perfect example is like, if, for example, you want to buy a vehicle, let's say it's a red Tesla, and you're on the internet for months looking on red Teslas, which the one that I want to get, and you finally make the decision to go to the dealership, and you find the red Tesla that you want to buy, and you purchase that red Tesla. You're driving home, and all of a sudden you notice there's another red Tesla that just drove by you, and you thought, that's pretty strange. And you just keep driving, and you're at a red light, and all of a sudden the car next to you is a red Tesla, and you keep seeing red Teslas all over the place for weeks. Did everybody buy a red Tesla because you just bought a red Tesla, or are you now more aware that there's more red Teslas on the street because you have activated the reticular activation system? So when you change your language and say, I am healthy, I am powerful, I am beautiful, I am strong, I am whatever uplifting word, you're going to get more of what you want to work for you versus the things you don't want to work for you, because we don't get what we want in life. We get what we are, and what we are those thoughts.
Yeah. And I will attest to everything you said there, because I think it is 100% true. And I think most of like my clients, and even where I was before, if we really actually look at the thoughts, what we're telling ourselves constantly throughout the day, it reveals a lot of the results that we are consistently getting over and over and over again, which is why, this has to be a mental transformation. And if we're not putting new information into our brain consistently on a daily basis, and consistently morning routine, which is why I'm huge on that, creating that morning routine when our brain is the most pliable, it's the most able to create these new neural pathways to reset itself. That is definitely something that is part of the physical transformation. It is that mental transformation. Was there any things that like you specifically did, like tangible, that you found that really, really helped you during that period of your life?
Absolutely. So like you said, the morning, the first hour after you wake up, the subconscious mind is very impressionable, also right before bed. So what I started doing is I'm very protective for the last probably 7 years, really consistently, of protecting my bedtime routine and my morning time routine. So before bed, I have a notepad on my nightstand, and I'll write down 10 things I'm grateful for that happened during the day. And then I'll write down my goals, and I'll read my Think and Grow Rich burning desire statement. And then I'll do the same thing when I wake up in the morning. And I haven't missed a single day of doing that in over 5 years. I have notepads after notepads of doing that. So gratitude is so important. There's always something to be grateful for. I know there's a lot of crazy things happening in the world. There's a lot of evil, but the universal law of polarity states for every negative, there's a positive. So if we focus on the good, we'll get more good, because what we appreciate. So the tangible thing, the practical thing, to answer your question, write down what you're grateful for every single night before bed, right when you wake up in the morning. Write down your goals, start feeding the beast. And I write them down as present tense, as if they're already accomplished, and protect that morning. Don't wake up and check your phone and check TikTok and Instagram, etc., because it's like playing Russian roulette. Yeah, you could check your phone first thing in the morning and see an awesome text from Rachel saying how much she supports you. Or you could see that there's a negative comment on your social media now, or a problem you have to solve. And now you're just, you're running, you're just letting the day own you instead of you owning the day. So have a morning routine. I don't even look at my phone for the first 90 minutes. I walk my dog. I get morning sunlight to set my circadian rhythm. And then about an hour and a half after I wake up, I have my coffee. So that's pretty much my routine.
Yeah. And you guys listening, this is really, really powerful stuff. And I think sometimes we underestimate how powerful these things really are, how powerful, doing gratitudes before bedtime. We're like, oh, I don't need to do that. It's just another thing I have to do. Or that morning routine, not checking our phones, not putting information in our brain first thing in the morning that's negative about everything happening in the news, or, exposing ourselves on social media to everybody who has a perfect life, who we're envious of. But having an intentional morning routine, which is going to be a keystone habit that is going to domino the thoughts and the things that show up throughout the rest of your day. And I think it's just so underestimated in a lot of like transformational journeys, is really like the power of our thoughts, and is that morning routine, the things that we're doing to really create that mindset, because that's really where it begins. And I know oftentimes, and I've been there before I started my journey, very, very skeptical, kind of on that side of like, oh, I don't need to do that. I just need to eat healthier. I just need to go work out. I just need to do it. But if it was that easy, why aren't we doing it? Right? Why aren't we doing it? So we do have to be very, very intentional with what we're putting into our mind. And I think that is something that if even people take that away from this podcast today, that would be something that would help them tremendously. But I do want to dive into all things keto, because I know that is really where a lot of your physical transformation came from, with the weight loss side of everything. And now you teach this whole Keto Kamp, and you help other people get to the root cause of their health issues. And you use that ketogenic diet to help so many people now. So tell me a little bit about like what got you, or what made you want to go down the keto route when you began your weight loss journey?
Yeah, actually, when I lost the weight, I didn't even do it with keto. I didn't even do it the way that I would teach it
Okay.
now. And it was a lesson to be learned. And I know you could relate. I was one of those fit, sick people. I had digestive issues. I had acne, bloating, but I had six pack abs and I was super fit and I looked healthy, but on the inside, I was not healthy. So after I went through my transformation, I was still exploring what real cellular health looked like. I didn't know, I didn't understand it. So I actually explored different avenues and diets. I did the vegan diet for a year and a half after reading the China study, not understanding how to read studies. It kind of just duped me. And I was a plant-based, 100% vegan and a CrossFitter, if you could imagine, for a year and a half. And in the beginning, it was great. I got the benefits from it, but then I hit that vegan wall and I was very dogmatic about it, lesson learned. But I stuck with it for 15 months. This is back in 2013. And then I realized, okay, this is not working for me. My hormones are wonky. I still have digestive issues. I need to go get some lab work done, verified the fact that the way that I felt. So then I got into some research on ketosis and also intermittent fasting. I started to get into the work of like Paul Chek and Dr. Daniel Pompa, who's now my mentor, and some other individuals. And it was really fascinating to me to read about ketosis and how our ancestors naturally were in a state of ketosis. So that's when I actually applied keto back in 2013, 2014, along with fasting. And it made a huge difference for the way I felt. And it transformed my lab work. And ever since then, I've been figuring it out, still learning about keto, still learning about fasting, but I've applied it and now I'm teaching it to the world. And the overall goal to get somebody healthy, I believe, is three simple steps. Simple steps on paper, but very difficult to actually get it all together. The first step is to identify the interference. What is interfering with this innate intelligence from doing its job? And it's usually multiple things. The second thing is to work on removing that interference. The third step is to just allow your body to heal. So when we think about how does keto and fasting come into play, where a lot of people, they're sugar burners, they're eating every 2 to 3 hours. The standard American is eating about 300 grams of carbs per day, and they're constantly just stuck as a glucose burner. And that is a very inflammatory state. So if we could use ketosis, which I view not as a diet, but a metabolic process for a strategic period of time, great way to reduce inflammation as we do other things along the way as well.
Yeah, you hit on one of my questions there, which is what is the big difference metabolically between someone who is a carbohydrate burner versus somebody who's a fat burner? And what's the benefits for being a fat burner versus being a carb burner?
Yeah, I'll go deeper. I love that you have that question.
I love going deeper.
So when we think about the human body, 50 to 70 trillion cells, give or take, inside the body. But out of those trillion cells, there's only pretty much two options for fuel. Either the cell, the mitochondria, is burning glucose, sugar, or it's burning fat and using ketones. When somebody is stuck as a sugar burner, they have to eat every 2 to 3 hours to get glucose in the brain. That's not fun, but also it creates a lot of oxidation and inflammation inside of the cell, because cells, as you know, cells produce energy via the mitochondria and ATP, and it creates toxins, similar to if I burned firewood in my room here and there was smoke. We would need a chimney or something to get that smoke out. Well, when you're stuck burning sugar, it creates a lot of smoke. I give the analogy of a Mack truck, right? Picture a Mack truck speeding through the streets of Texas, where you are, with all this smoke being blasted out of the exhaust pipes. The Mack truck is not going to be healthy for the surrounding environment. Well, when your cells are stuck burning sugar, not healthy for your cellular environment. That's what it's like when you're a sugar burner. When you transition and become a fat burner and you are producing ketones, that's like a Tesla, going back to Tesla, cleaner source of energy versus the Mack truck. So that's the biggest difference. And of course, it's anti-inflammatory. You achieve metabolic flexibility, which is the ultimate goal. So you don't have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You could allow your body to burn through its glucose reserves, its sugar reserves, the glycogen stores, and start tapping into its fat stores. And that's what we want to do. We want to all achieve metabolic flexibility. And that's how I teach keto.
Yeah, I love that. And I try to get all of my clients to become more fat adopted, whether that's ketogenic or not. And I know like ketogenic's great for getting people fat adopted, especially people who are like insulin resistance. And we're going to dive into all the other benefits that the ketogenic diet does as well too, which I'm incredibly fascinated about. But talk to me specifically about somebody who has insulin resistance, somebody who's diabetic what is actually happening there? Because typically the way I think most physicians describe it is, hey, you just need to cut your calories, stop eating so much, work out a little bit more. And, here's some medication, maybe some insulin, here's some statins, those are very common medications that are prescribed. I don't know if you've ever heard of like the sugar bowl analogy, but I tell this analogy to a lot of my clients where basically, when we're insulin resistant, our body's like the sugar bowl and the sugar is kind of overflowing out, which is literally causing all of this oxidative stress, literally rotting of all of these different body systems and causing them to break down. And what traditional Western medicine does is it says, hey, just eat less, work out more. But here's some insulin and let's ram that sugar back into the bowl that's kind of overflowing and pouring out. And it doesn't want to be there in the first place, does it? Like it's trying to get out. So tell me a little bit about, for those who are listening, like what is actually happening when we're insulin resistant? And is that something that we can reverse?
It's a great question. I love the analogy. Empty out the damn bowl. That's the solution. Yeah. Well, when you think about insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, not type 1, most of the time, it's a lifestyle. These are lifestyle conditions that it would make sense to treat with lifestyle changes, right? But the allopathic medicine, it's a huge, yeah, right. It makes so much sense, right? So my part of my story, Rachel, and I didn't share this earlier, and my dad had type 2 diabetes, naturally following a standard American diet. He had insulin resistance and then type 2 diabetes, which is typically the progression of it. And he ended up getting a massive stroke from his diabetes, which left him paralyzed, the inability to speak, and ended up taking his life back in 2014, which took me being in the health space from a hobby to a purpose. And that's when I really got serious. And I started to ask all these questions, like, why did this happen to my dad? I filled up his medication every month, every week, actually. I would fill up his medication every Tuesday, took him to the grocery store. I followed all the advice that his doctors gave him, and yet he lost his life. So what I came to find, and I teach this now all over the place, is that they were never trying to get to the root cause of why he had type 2 diabetes. They were trying to manage and treat his symptoms. And that didn't make any sense to me now. But back then I just kind of blindly followed. Yeah. So what ended up happening, well, what happens with insulin resistance and diabetes, when we eat specifically carbohydrates, we get a higher insulin spike versus protein, and then fat, very minimum at all in insulin spike. Insulin in itself, it's not the bad guy. We wouldn't exist today, right, Rachel? If we didn't have the process of producing insulin by the pancreas, we would all be dead, because it's a survival mechanism. But when we're calling insulin, which I call insulin the bully of the block, all the time, we're going to be in a fat storage state all the time. And then the beta cells in the pancreas get burned out, and it also raises inflammation. So the receptor sites for insulin are now not working better. So it's like if I put my fingers in my ears, or even better analogy, if I hit the mute button here on Zoom and I'm speaking to you, you can't hear me. You're going to be frustrated. I'm going to be frustrated. There's going to be dysfunction. That's what's happening when we burn out the beta cells in our pancreas and we get inflammation around our receptor sites. So what we want to do is, number one, focus on reducing cellular inflammation. We do that by eating less carbohydrates, giving the pancreas a break, eating more fat and protein. And then number two, identifying other areas, of course, that are causing inflammation. In America, it's estimated that 60% of Americans at least are pre-diabetic or diabetic. Mm-hmm. And when you think about insulin resistance, it takes years to develop, and then eventually it's diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. And then on your lab work, they tell you, hey, you have diabetes, here's a medication, here's insulin. But the body is amazing. We are capable of healing this innate intelligence, and all we have to do is remove the interference. So keto and fasting are two powerful tools to keep insulin low and allow your body to heal, allow the beta cells in your pancreas to heal. And I've seen it reverse insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes all the time. It happens all the time. I have students inside of my Keto Kamp Academy who are always posting, got off my insulin. Of course, you work with your doctor, but got off my insulin and got off my medication. And I know you see it all the time too. So we're not doomed by a diagnosis. When a doctor tells you you have a terminal disease, what they should be saying is that my ability to help you is terminal, and find a new doctor. Nobody should play God. I believe the body is amazing. So we could reverse it to answer your question. And keto and fasting are two powerful tools to help with that.
Yeah. And then I want to dive into a little bit more of the fasting part here in a minute, but I also want to add to what you just were talking about with doctors just treating the symptoms and managing it. I oftentimes give the analogy of, insulin resistance. It's really a spectrum and it's not really a light switch. And with Western medicine, we look at it's a light switch. You either have it or you don't. I've actually heard the story of a client going to the doctor and he was borderline diabetic, but he wasn't full blown diabetic. And basically what the doctor said is, okay, you're fine. Come back, check in here in, 3-6 months. And if it's high, we'll go ahead and put you on some medication. And it's that's the worst thing ever. What a terrible doctor. And there are some, by the way, incredible doctors out there, Totally. But in that instance, telling your client you're not full blown diabetic yet, kind of like it's a light switch, but saying, hey, if it gets to that point, we'll go ahead and put you on medication again to like what you said, manage the symptoms, make sure you don't just die immediately because you have this going on. But in reality, it's a spectrum, and the higher blood sugar, the higher levels of insulin are chronically, the closer and the closer we get, and the more issues we end up having with inflammation, with oxidative stress, with fat gain, and then everything that comes along with that, neurological issues. So it's really a spectrum. It's not so much a light switch. So I just wanted to add that for those who are listening. But talk to me a little bit about intermittent fasting, because that's something I utilize a lot with my clients, especially clients who even have gut issues, for giving the gut a chance to rest, to heal and repair. I've also utilized it to help a lot of people who kind of maybe even been at a plateau with weight loss where they can't kind of get that next step further. And I also think that for people, when it comes to dieting, sometimes we can even do better just with intermittent fasting and not even worrying about food, especially if you're an entrepreneur and busy all the time, instead of having to worry about just eating less and, working on the calorie side of everything. But when we do intermittent fasting, what are the benefits to that? And are you able to kind of get in that ketogenic state as well too through intermittent fasting? Or what are some of the benefits you would say from that?
Yeah, you named a few. I love intermittent fasting and just in general fasting strategies. Fasting checks the box for so many health conditions. One of them, to talk about the gut, I give an analogy about what it takes how much it takes to digest a meal. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of resources. When I interviewed Dr. Zach Bush last year on my Keto Kamp podcast, he was sharing with me a study from the University of Virginia that looked at college students, and they wanted to track how long it took to digest a standard American diet meal, which was in this case 800 calories of mellow mushroom pizza. And it took on average 14 hours to digest that meal. So if somebody's not fasting for at least 14 hours and they're eating a standard American diet, it's going to create a backlog of issues in their digestive system. But when you practice fasting, it gives your digestive system a reset and a break. Kind of like, here's the analogy, a corporate worker who works 9 to 5 every single day. We'll call her Sandra. So Sandra works 9 to 5 and she puts in 8 hours of work at her job. It's now 5 p.m. and Sandra's walking out to her car. She's tired. She's exhausted, ready to go home and just relax. And as she's entering her car, she gets a phone call from her boss saying, Sandra, we need you to come back into the office and work another 5 hours on a new project. So she goes back in the office, works another 5 hours. It's now 10 p.m. at night, walking back to her car. She's exhausted, ready to just go home and sleep. And she gets that same phone call. Sandra, we need you to come back for another 5 hours. Now imagine this happening to her for days, for weeks, or for months. She would be destroyed. This is exactly what's happening when we're not practicing fasting. We are overwhelming our digestive system. So for the first time in a long time, for many people, it's a great way to reset the gut. It takes massive amounts of energy, resources, and blood flow to digest a meal. Nobody's ever eaten a big meal like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner and then said, I'm ready to go get some work done, right? That never happens. They want to sit on their couch and just be lazy because it takes energy away from you. It doesn't give you energy. So that's one benefit. There's also some research, MIT research that I wrote about in my book, 24-hour water fast strengthened intestinal stem cells in mice, right? So we know that is one benefit. Another benefit is autophagy. I love autophagy. It's a great word. Of course, you get autophagy through exercise. You get them through these what's called senolytic ingredients in foods. But fasting is another way to achieve autophagy. And if your audience is not familiar with autophagy, the Greek definition of autophagy is eat thyself. Sounds weird, but it's super cool. The body is so stinking smart that when it's not getting food energy, like you're not eating, fasting, it needs to get energy from somewhere. So it looks for damaged cells, mitochondria, damaged proteins, and it starts to fix them and regenerate them for energy. The analogy for autophagy, I'm just doing so many analogies here, but the analogy for autophagy is a refrigerator. You open up the refrigerator, you have groceries inside of your refrigerator. They all have an expiration date on the groceries. What would happen if you let all the groceries inside of your refrigerator expire, but instead of throwing them into the trash, you kind of just push them towards the back of the fridge, buy fresh groceries, and close that door? It's going to be disgusting. There's going to be mold, bacteria, disease will manifest in that refrigerator. The human body is like that refrigerator. We have cells, proteins, mitochondria that have expiration dates on them. And if we're not taking the time to throw them out, it leads to disease. Autophagy is the process of throwing out the expired groceries. That's why a world-renowned oncologist, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who wrote the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, he said a 7-day water-only fast would reduce your risk of cancer by 95% because of this maximum autophagy process. So that's why those are two big reasons right there. And I could share a little bit about like the schedules that I like to use.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into the schedule you use for intermittent fasting. And I'm going to assume you're not a fan of the eat small meals frequently throughout the day so I can keep my metabolic system going, right?
Not a fan of that. I used to be. I know you were too, but not anymore.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about when doing intermittent fasting, is there a specific schedule that people need to follow? I know some people like to start at noon, go until 8 o'clock. I know when I've heard about circadian rhythm fasting, where that's even a little bit differently. What do you recommend when doing some intermittent fasting or even an extended fast for that sake?
The way that I view fasting is it's a muscle you want to develop. So if you're brand new to fasting, I would start with just 12 hours. Done eating at 7 p.m., don't eat until 7 a.m. the next day, 12-hour fast right there. And then you want to kind of work your way up to, I like an 18-6 on most days for most people, meaning 18 hours out of a 24-hour period, you're in the fasted state, water, electrolytes, minerals, no food. And then you have a 6-hour eating window. And that could be 12 to 6, or it could be a different schedule, whatever works for you. Then I like throwing in a 24-hour fast for more of the seasoned fasters out there, which is great for the gut. I like to do a 5-day water fast once per year to get that max autophagy, just to be preventative. If you're going to do that, you got to know what you're doing. I recommend checking glucose and ketones, maybe working with like somebody like Rachel or a coach, but you got to know what you're doing. So I like a block fast, but the goal with fasting, you want to mix up the schedule. I don't like the same schedule over and over and over because people hit plateaus that way. Similar to going to the gym, you don't do the same workout over and over and over. So I like mixing up the fasting schedules, but for most days, I like an 18-6 for most people. Real quick, for women, and I wrote about this in my book, women should definitely practice fasting and keto differently than men. One perfect example is women who have a monthly cycle, a menstrual cycle. The 5 to 7 days right before the period is when two hormones, progesterone and estrogen, are low. And fasting will not help you build progesterone. It'll actually help you decrease progesterone, which could lead to a heavy menstrual cycle and more cravings that week leading up to your period. The human body is smart. A lot of women experience cravings right before their period because their body wants carbohydrates and not fasting to raise progesterone. So the 5 to 7 days before your period is when I don't like keto and I don't like much fasting. I like more higher healthy carbs, maybe 3 to 4 meals a day.
What are some things that people should try to do before entering into a fast? Because I know when you're a bit more fat adapted, which we've talked about a little bit, like we're able to enter into a fasting state much easier. And I'm typically talking about probably like extended fast, 24-hour fast periods. And I think some of the things that I hear a lot online, even in the fitness community, is I'm going to be starving myself. Oh my gosh, that's not good. I'm going to slow down my metabolism, because there's a lot out there about, if you're not eating enough food, you're going to be in a starvation. You're going to slow down your metabolism. So I want to kind of hit on that myth, number one. And then is there anything that people should do when prepping for a fast? Is there a certain period? Is there some different things that they should do to modify their diet? What do you recommend?
For the second question, do you mean like a longer fast or a regular fast?
Like a longer fast.
Okay.
So like 12-hour fast. I think most people can enter into that fasting period, even if they have a good amount of carbohydrates in their diet. But I know for people who want to do maybe a 16-hour fast or even go up to like a 24-hour fast where we get most of that like autophagy action happening. If they aren't very well fat adapted, and correct me, you're the expert, it's going to be a little bit harder, and we're going to have more blood sugar issues going on, more cravings. And then they're going to be like, this sucks. Fasting is not for me.
Yeah, you said it exactly. So I have 4 pillars to how I teach keto and fasting. The first pillar is called adapt, because I want you to get fat adapted before we even practice fasting. When you go into, let's say you're listening to this podcast with Rachel and I, and you're still a sugar burner, and you hear about all the amazing benefits of fasting, and you say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do an 18-hour water fast because Ben said that's a good schedule. If you're a sugar burner, the brain will panic and it'll send the body intense cravings, signals for cravings. And even the best willpower in the world might not be able to overcome that, because you don't have the ability to produce ketones, and the brain will run low on glucose and the brain will panic, goes into survival mode. But when you're fat adapted and now you have more metabolic flexibility to produce ketones, as you make that switch, as glucose drops in the brain, ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate has the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. Then it gives your brain an energy source, so you don't get that panic. I would make sure we get fat adapted before we do any kind of fasting strategies, especially longer than 16 hours. What can also help is increasing your electrolytes. A lot of people don't get enough minerals, electrolytes, and they start to lose a lot of electrolytes, which could lead to a headache or just not feeling well. So keep your electrolytes up. You could also do things like fasting crutches, I call them. Bulletproof coffee with butter and MCT oil is a fasting crutch. Even just having like a tablespoon of coconut oil, or like you mentioned earlier, just some butter. That's not a traditional water fast, but you still get a lot of benefits with it. And it could be a good crutch to help you extend that window. So that's what I would recommend to answer question number 2. I'll go to question 1, but anything else on question 2?
Yeah. How long does it typically take for someone to get fat adapted? I know it kind of depends on the person and diet, but what would be like the time frame you'd recommend for most people to kind of get into that or to get that metabolic switch?
Yeah. So in the book, I have something called the 2-2-2-2 rule. And I could get you fat adapted in 14 days with this rule. No keto flu required, no side effects required. So here's how it works. First step, assess how many carbohydrates you're having right now before you make any changes. You could use MyFitnessPal, Chronometer. There's free apps. Just go on Dr. Google. And maybe it's 300 grams, like the average American. And what you want to do on day 1 is decrease that by 25%. So go from like 300 grams to 225, and then 225 to 175. You want to gradually decrease the carbs to get below 50 total grams for the day. Don't do it all in one day, because that'll cause the issues with the keto flu, which is really carbohydrate withdrawal symptoms. So gradual approach, maybe it's a 7-day approach, but at the same time, you want to increase your healthy fats. So the 2-2-2-2 rule is as such. Every single day, you want to consume 2 tablespoons of either olive oil or avocado oil, 2 tablespoons of coconut oil or MCT oil, 2 tablespoons of grass-fed butter or grass-fed ghee, and 2 teaspoons of sea salt. So hit that 2-2-2-2 rule, gradually decrease your carbs, and in 14 days, you're fat adapted and producing ketones. Now, keep in mind, fat adaptation is not the same as keto adaptation. That typically takes 8 to 12 weeks of strict ketosis, but getting fat adapted is perfect before you enter into a fasting state.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. What are some like common, I know we kind of skipped question 1, and I think we'll go back to that.
Yeah, we'll get back to it. I remember it, yeah.
What are some common like keto mistakes that you see a lot of people make when trying to get started with the ketogenic diet?
The biggest one, well, I already mentioned, is the electrolytes. That's one. So just, drink your electrolytes, get the sea salt, real salt. Another one is the liver. So the liver, I call the liver the soccer mom organ, because she does everything. The liver produces bile. Bile is very important for many reasons. It has a detoxification effect, but also bile is like a detergent to break down fat-soluble vitamins, the dietary fat that you eat, vitamins A, D, E, and K. So when you start doing the 2-2-2 rule and you start eating more fats, but you have sluggish bile, that'll cause some digestive issues, and you're going to think keto didn't work for you and it's pure crap. And this guy, Ben Azadi, is full of crap. But what we want to do is support the liver. So bitter for the liver. I'm a big fan of bitters, whether you're doing keto or not. Here are my favorite bitters. I love arugula, dandelion greens, apple cider vinegar. I also love coffee. Organic coffee could be a bitter. Lemons and limes, sprinkling that over your keto meats. Rosemary, thyme, and basil, great herbs you could just smell that could help create these digestive enzymes. So getting those bitters up, getting the electrolytes up, that's going to make a big difference. A lot of people don't have proper bile flow. It's a big mistake to not support the liver. And you might want to even take like some digestive enzymes with ox bile, especially if you don't have a gallbladder.
Yes, yes. I think that's really important. And I've seen in a lot of people's gut microbiome tests, you can see the low bile flow when we do the gut zoomer, problem metabolizing fats. And it's really a liver issue and not a fat issue. And they're like, I can't tolerate fats very, very well. What about overdoing fats, in terms of weight loss? Because I think another myth that I hear a lot with keto is you can eat as many fats as you want, and it's not the same. There's no insulin response. So you can just eat as much as you want. And does that really work that way?
It's not going to work long term. So in the beginning, I like eating an abundance of healthy fat just to get your body familiar with burning fat. That's 14 days. After 14 days, once you're in ketosis, and you could verify, I could talk about ways to test, but after you're in ketosis, then we want to actually scale down the fat and focus on protein. Protein is my priority after you're in ketosis, and just get enough fat so that you're satiated. Because to your point, Rachel, your body, even though there's no insulin response from fat, it's still calories, and your body has to burn that before its own body fat. So if you're drinking the fatty coffees and you're adding all this butter, coconut oil, your body has to burn that before body fat. So if you hit a plateau on keto, cut the fat, prioritize the protein.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think just sometimes when we get gung-ho about doing a ketogenic diet, I think some of the biggest things that I've seen that my clients have ran into is overdoing the fats a little bit too much. And I even heard you talk about in one of your videos, as I was kind of researching all your stuff, is that keto is not always high fat, but it's actually instead low carbohydrate, right?
That's right. You said it exactly. The goal is to bring your carbs low. And in the beginning, it is high fat, but after 14 days, high protein, or adequate protein, I should say.
Yeah. I love that. So I think there's so many benefits to keto, intermittent fasting, especially, for weight loss. But one of the things I want to talk about is mental health. And just after going through the lockdown and COVID, I know, mental health issues, brain health related issues, depression, anxiety, all of these have been at an all-time high. And I do know that the ketogenic diet does have a lot of benefits for neurological health for a lot of people, with the role that it can play. So I want to kind of dive into mental health, especially, knowing your story, knowing where you've been at in your life, of being at a place of, rock bottom, depression, almost wanting to commit suicide, but also getting to this place where you are at today, and even utilizing the ketogenic diet. What are some benefits to the ketogenic diet for like mental health and neurological health?
And, we are what we eat. If we're eating a whole bunch of processed carbohydrates, how can we function well? How could we think good thoughts? How could we have brain health? First of all, when you do clean keto, because there's a big difference between dirty keto with inflammatory fats and clean keto, the way that we teach it here, it's massive for reducing inflammation. Number one, brain inflammation. If you reduce brain inflammation, it only makes sense that you're going to be able to function better mentally. Number two, you're not getting those glucose spikes, roller coaster glucose spikes that go up and down like the average person who's eating a whole bunch of carbs. So when you keep insulin stable, you're going to think better. And then you add fasting into the mix, you produce BDNF with fasting, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor. You're going to think better as well. The biggest benefit with ketones for the brain is after you get keto adapted. So it does take some time to get there. It takes 8 to 12 weeks of strict ketosis to actually, now the mitochondria is using those ketones very, very efficiently. But once you get to that point, it's such a breakthrough for mental conditions, brain fog, addiction. Of course, if you have a serious addiction issue, you want to work with somebody, but I can't tell you how beneficial it's been, not just for myself, but for a lot of my students. And it's just so liberating when you don't have to eat a snack of carbohydrates every 2 to 3 hours. I mean, how good can that feel? Your body's just getting its calories from your body fat, which is the ultimate goal. So the reduction of inflammation, brain inflammation, and keeping your glucose and insulin stable are the three main benefits of brain health from keto.
Yeah. And they use the ketogenic diet even for a lot of, I think, neurological issues like epilepsy in the hospital
Exactly.
as well too. Um, and not a lot of people realize when you have inflammation, throughout your body, when we get your blood work back and your C-reactive protein is high, when your homocysteine levels are high, you literally have inflammation in the brain. We just experience it in different ways. We don't have receptors in our brain where we can't really feel our brain, just like as if we had, inflammation in our stomach. We may feel that. We may experience it with gastrointestinal related issues, cramping, pain there. We may experience inflammation in other areas of our body and experience, the symptoms from that too. We don't really experience, the pain from inflammation in the brain, but we do experience the health brain related issues, which are oftentimes depression, anxiety, other neurological disorders, but are literally an inflammation related issue in the brain. So I think that's just something really, really important for those listening to take away from. And on the topic of,
we didn't get to the first question before. I forgot about it. Yeah, there's a lot of myths surrounding fasting. That's one of them. If I don't eat every 2 to 3 hours, or if I skip a meal, I'm going to go into the starvation mode. The body is not stupid. The body raises counter-regulatory hormones to combat that. This is your body's literal way of pumping itself full of energy so that it's alert, focused, and energized. Why? So it could go out there and hunt and kill. The body doesn't care or know Uber Eats, DoorDash, Whole Foods. It goes into the survival mode. We're hardwired this way. So you have glucagon going up, cortisol going up, human growth hormone, and a few others going up. And these are running counter to insulin, counter-regulatory hormones. There's also a study, Dr. Jason Fung, who wrote a great excerpt in my book. He has a study that shows 4 consecutive days of fasting improved the metabolic rate by 13%. So not only did it not slow down, it actually improved it by 13%. Why? Counter-regulatory hormones. The body is not stupid. It's not going to go into the survival mode. Now, there is a Goldilocks effect. Of course, if you do a ton of fasting, if you're less than 5% body fat, you might start to slow down the metabolism. But if you're not at that point, if you have more than 10, 15% body fat, you won't get that negative effect.
Yeah. So breaking the myth. Fasting does not slow down your metabolism. We do not need to eat 6 small, frequent meals throughout the day in order to keep our metabolic system going. I hated that myth for so long.
Oh
so
my gosh. It's not fun.
No, thank you so much for debunking that. I can't even believe it's still around. And if you think about it, back when hunter and gathering, we didn't have time to sit and eat small, frequent meals throughout the day. We literally would eat until we felt full and satisfied. And then we would wait again until the next time we were able to have a meal. And
exactly.
There's no grazing.
Oh my gosh. The myth is still strong, Rachel. Whenever I post a video about stop snacking, stop eating every 2 to 3 hours, I can't tell you how much hate I get from the fitness industry. I did a video on my TikTok just like a few weeks ago talking about why eating every 2 to 3 hours is going to age you faster. And it got over 1 million views, but I got a lot of hate from the fitness people. One of them is a gentleman, I'm going to name him, but out of respect, Lane Norton out of, I think he's out of Florida as well. He's a very smart guy. He's got I'm sure you know who he is. And he's calling me out in a bullied way. And I don't work that way. I'm a lover, not a fighter. But he agreed with me because I had a voice conversation with him on Instagram. I said, Lane, do you really think it's healthy for the average American to eat every 2 to 3 hours who are not burning it off? They're not like you. They're not working out all the time. Do you think that's healthy? And he goes, no, it wouldn't be healthy. Well, that's the point. The average American is not exercising the entire day. They're sedentary. 60% of the population in America is diabetic or pre-diabetic. I mean, that's who I'm talking to. And that's the issue there.
Yeah. And not a lot of people realize too, a lot of the people who are eating the 6 small frequent meals throughout the day, they're bodybuilders too, most of the time. And they have already an inhumane amount of skeletal muscle mass with their training. And to maintain that skeletal muscle mass, you typically do have to shuttle a ton of nutrients to it constantly throughout the day. And Lee Norton comes from that community, comes from the bodybuilding world. It's not healthy, which is why if you go back to how we typically would eat, we wouldn't be able to maintain naturally that amount of skeletal muscle mass. So those bodybuilders who have this crazy amount of skeletal muscle mass that their body wouldn't naturally carry, even on a high protein diet, they have to constantly be feeding it. But I'll also say sometimes I can see that, some of the other negative side effects. I've seen bodybuilders with even, borderline insulin resistance, inflammation, a lot of other internal issues that are off as well too. So if we're looking at it from like an overall health standpoint for the average person who's trying to lose some weight, who has maybe some inflammation, which is most of the population, small frequent meals throughout the day, unless you're a crazy bodybuilder and you're training consistently, lifting a ton of heavy weight, and you're trying to just put on a shit ton of skeletal muscle mass, then maybe we need to eat a little bit more frequently for the average person.
Exactly. And would you agree, Rachel, that having goals for building a whole bunch of muscle and being a bodybuilder are not always synonymous with having health and longevity goals?
Oh yeah, I know firsthand with just all of my health journey and everything. That was when my health went to complete shit, was when I was in the world of competitive bodybuilding. And even though I wasn't like huge with a ton of skeletal muscle mass, the things I had to do to, maintain my skeletal muscle mass while I was at a very low percentage body fat with my thyroid, my hormones, and my gut health, everything got completely off whack. So skeletal muscle mass, having that amount in low body fat percentage doesn't always equate to overall health. Now, as we talked about on our podcast, we did on yours, we need to support skeletal muscle mass, but I think with just looking at that as the sole focus for overall health, it's definitely going to be a disservice to the client for sure.
I agree.
So that kind of brings me to kind of our last few questions, talking a little bit more about like the mental health. We talked about the benefits to doing the ketogenic diet, but I wanted to ask you specifically, just because you've been on that side of where you've struggled, kind of been at the rock bottom, is there anything that you would kind of recommend for somebody who's maybe at that point right now in their life, somebody who, has been wanting to create the change, but they're feeling stuck, they're feeling unhappy, depressed, they try to make change, but they keep finding themselves falling back into these old patterns and just really looking for change? What would you recommend to that person? Where should they start?
That's a great question. I love the question. And I can't believe we're already winding down the interview. It's been so much fun.
It's been already an hour.
So control your environment. You become your environment. And there's a great video on YouTube that anybody could go search. Just type in fleas in a jar on YouTube. What you're going to see, they put hundreds of fleas inside of a jar, and they left that jar over the fleas for, I think, over 24 hours. And after 24 hours, they removed the jar, and the fleas were just flying in the same motion as if the jar was there. The jar was completely removed. Not only that, not only did none of them escape because they were conditioned by their environment to be stuck there, but their offspring did the same thing. Offspring never even escaped. Your environment is so important. Either you become your environment or your environment becomes you. So do an audit. What I have all my students in my academy do is grab a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle and then across at the top. And then on the left side at the top of the page, you want to write chargers. On the right side, you want to write drainers. And start by doing an audit of every single person in your life. People who are chargers are people who are supporting you. You feel energized after you have a conversation with them. They're very inspiring. You put them on the left side. It's going to probably be a short list. On the right side, you want to put the people who are draining you. They're gossiping. They're talking about the news. They're talking about their scarcity mindset. You feel exhausted after you speak to them. Put them on the right side. After you have determined the people in your life, then spend more time with the people on the left versus the right. You change your environment, number one. That's going to make it very easier, much more easier for you to make these changes. Second thing is to get really clear on your why, because reasons come before results. You have to have a strong why. And if you have a strong why, the how becomes easier. So why do you want to lose 50 pounds? It's not because you just want to get healthy. That's great. There's layers behind that. Where is it showing up in your life? Do you not have energy for your kids? Are you on vacation with your family and you're complaining all the time? Like, how is it affecting your life? Get clear on that why, and then keep that why in front of you. Put it on a notepad, on your refrigerator, on your computer, on your bathroom mirror. So when life punches you in the face, you just reframe and look back at your why. That's number two. Number three is to understand that failure is not a person. Failure is an event. All right. I hear a lot of people, and I'm sure you do too. I am such a failure. I messed up. I didn't do what you told me to do. You're not a failure. It's an event. What can you learn from that? When you learn from that, failure goes away. It's just a myth. If you don't give up, you never fail. You learn from it and it becomes wisdom. So understand that failure is really wisdom when you learn from it. And then the fourth thing here is to love yourself like your life depended on it. Practice self-love. Look in the mirror and tell yourself you love yourself. Maybe you're standing in front of the mirror naked. Tell yourself you love yourself. It's super weird, but it's very helpful for you to love yourself, because my friend Dr. Will Cole said, you cannot heal a body that you hate. And I'll take that a step further and say, you cannot heal a body that has hate, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else. So practice self-love, love yourself like your life depended on it, which is a great book, by the way. And those are the 4 steps that I think would change your life.
Yeah, I love that. What a great answer with controlling your surroundings, controlling the thoughts that you're putting into your mind, reminding yourself every single day why you're on this journey, why it's important. I think those are incredibly powerful things that we can begin to do, especially with the world that we're in right now at an all-time high with depression, anxiety. And I also think it's starting with our health, starting with, the foods that we're putting into our body. I always say, fitness, nutrition, it is the gateway drug to personal development, to becoming the best version of ourselves. And I just want to thank you for being an advocate for health, for mental health, and just overall personal development. I know you are changing thousands and thousands of people's lives with your own story, for those who are listening here today. And also even just with all of the incredible information that you're putting out there. So we can't thank you enough for everything that you do. Is there any last things that you wanted to hit on or add to today's podcast?
Yeah, no, thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure being on your show. I had a blast with you on my Keto Kamp podcast. I just love the work that you're doing. The last message I'll share with your audience is a quick story of a donkey. And this donkey was in a small village. And in this small village, there was an old well in this small village. And this donkey ended up falling inside of the well. And the donkey was screaming, help, of course, not speaking English, but screaming for help. And the villagers didn't know what to do. They wanted to actually try to save this donkey, get it out of the well. But the well was too deep down in the well, and the well was old. So they tried for hours, but they couldn't get the donkey out. So the villagers thought, what are we going to do? Well, they started to think about it. The donkey's very old. The well is also old, and they had been thinking about sealing it off. So they said, we have to just cut our losses and sacrifice the donkey and just make sure no other donkeys fall in there. So they all grabbed shovels and they started grabbing the dirt from the ground and throwing it down the well on the donkey. The donkey was screaming even more, and they just kept shoveling and shoveling. And then all of a sudden the donkey gets quiet. There's no sounds coming out, and they just keep shoveling and shoveling. And a few minutes later, the donkey climbs out of the well and runs away. So what happened there? Well, they put enough dirt so it could just step above. The dirt fell on the shoulder, it stepped above. Dirt fell on the shoulder, it stepped above. So the story here is that life is going to throw dirt on your shoulders. Take a step up and keep moving forward like that donkey did, because everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And life is going to punch you in the face, but that's not a bad thing. It creates grit, it creates character, and just take that dirt and take a step above like that donkey. And that's what I want your audience to do.
I love that. I love that story with the donkey and using what people are throwing at you to get out and to figure out your own way to get out of the environment that we're in. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. Thank you for coming on my podcast today. Where can people learn more about Keto Kamp and follow you and see more of the incredible information that you're putting out?
Thank you, Rachel. Well, I would love for your audience to get my book over at ketoflexbook.com. It's available on paperback and Kindle. I'm in the process of recording the Audible version of it. And then my biggest platform is my YouTube channel with about 130,000 subscribers. So if you go to Keto Kamp, Camp with a K on YouTube, you could see the tremendous amount of content we put out, along with our Keto Kamp podcast, which Rachel was just the guest on. So any of those platforms or any social media, I'm there and I'm very accessible.
All right, guys, go check out his book, Keto Flex. And thank you so much, Ben Azadi, for coming on my show today. This is Ben, Sheer Madness.